Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karim Gay, and I'm a member of the AAA Initiative Foundation, one member organization of IPAM, providing the IPAM Secretariat. IPAM is a collaborative network and exchange platform. I've got people in at the same time and is dedicated to sharing its proposals with the global community. To facilitate this, we host information webinars at least once every 2 months, showcasing the works of our members, task groups, and member organizations. I have to admit the people while I talk. Today's focus is on the IPAM statement on adaptation metrics for global goals. Following a brief introduction of IPAM, Karl Schulz, our steering committee chair and executive chair of the Higher Ground Foundation in the United Kingdom, will set the scene for the webinar. Subsequently, Joel Smith, an independent researcher from the USA, with an extensive publication record, notably for IPCC, will present the statement. Dr. Samra Sahai, a consultant researcher from India with broad experience as an author and reviewer for IPCC and IPBS, among others, will then discuss the application of these principles based on the ongoing work of the IPAM task group, currently developing a proof of concept to assess metrics for the GGA. A brief Q&A session will follow, and the second part of the webinar will commence with the presentation of IPAM's proposed work program by our chair, Karl Schulz. Iman Saidi, a diplomacy and cooperation researcher from IMAL Initiative in Morocco, leading our task group preparing a submission for the UAE BELAM program, would be the discussants. We aim to reserve 20 minutes for an open debate. Now, a quick overview of the International Platform on Adaptation Metrics. We currently have the support of 16 member organizations and 108 individual members scattered over 34 countries, representing a diverse global community. As shown today we have panelists from the US, the UK, Morocco, and India. Our mission is to be the go-to platform for adaptation metrics, open to all those working on the subject. Joining us is easy and straightforward. Simply visit our website using the link displayed here, and you'll find out how. We are not aligned with any specific party, industry, or stakeholder group, and we have notably created the Adaptation Metrics Mapping Evaluation Framework, the AMI, which is available freely on the website. Our recent contributions include 4 policy papers for COP28, beside the one we have today. We had the one defining the boundaries between adaptation and loss and damage, another one as an assessment of GGA options in the UNFCCC compilation and synthesis document, a third one on thematic targets and indicators for the global goal on adaptation, and these will be presented in upcoming sessions of this webinar series. Additionally, we are actively working on a submission to the UAE BELAM work program on indicators, which will be also discussed today. With this, I pass the floor to our chair, Karl. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Karim, and thanks for everyone who's joined today, especially our presenters, but everyone who's curious to learn more about the IPAM and what we're doing and what we think are some principles that are important for global goals. So as Karim mentioned, we're a global platform, reference platform for adaptation metrics. We're member-led, and we focus on different committees and working groups that tackle problems and challenges and opportunities in the metrics space for adaptation that we find of interest and potentially can be impactful. Metrics is about understanding where we lie, and adaptation metrics relates to how does the world adapt to climate change? How do you know that we're adapting? What are the ways that you can understand that? So there's nothing bigger than global goals for adaptation. And although adaptation is a local challenge, it's something that needs to be done by the global community. And that means both the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement and the global goal on adaptation there, but also there's a variety of different goals that are at the sectoral level and goals that are done by the private sector and by others that are global. And there are unique challenges to global goals. So we gathered last year through a working group to try to define, well, what are some principles under which we can understand and measure adaptation progress? And so we're going to be reporting on the outcome of that and also what we're going to be doing with it over the next period. So with that, I'd like to introduce Joel Smith, who was the leader of this working group that focused on this statement, and then invite Samraj Sahay, who was an instrumental member of that working group, to serve as a discussant and also consider what we're doing looking forward. So over to you, Joel.
All right, thank you, Carl. So I'm happy to join you folks from Boulder, Colorado, where it's just after 6 a.m., but good to be with you. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, and then I'm going to, all right. Trust you can see. Can you see the presentation? All right, we're good. Okay, so as Kareem and Carl mentioned, this is a statement we worked on last year on adaptation metrics for global goals, and we presented it at the COP. And I want to run through it briefly. Let's see here. I'm trying to advance my slides. Okay. There we go. All right. So this was drafted by a team of 8 people that I was honored to be a member of. And I think what I'm particularly proud of is our representation. 4 of us were from the geographic South, the rest from the North. We had 4 continents, Asia, Africa, Europe, and North America. So we had a very broad input into this statement. And as been mentioned, IPAM is dedicated to the proper and effective use of metrics to support adaptation to climate change. We define adaptation metrics as the group or groups of values that give an indication of the degree of progress towards adjustment to climate. So the key words there are values that are embedded in it, indication, hence indicators, and degree of progress. So it's important to keep that in mind. We don't have absolute measures of adaptation. They give us some insight into what's going on. There are 2 main uses for adaptation metrics. The first is broadly to get a sense of how we're doing on adaptation, and we would apply these across different spatial levels, subnational, local, maybe even down to household, but certainly local, and then at the national level, and that we're talking about parties to the convention, clearly a key focus under the UNFCCC. But then we'd like to then be able to look more broadly, maybe across subcontinents, continents, and even global. And the point here is to enable tracking of progress towards meeting the global goal on adaptation. Second use for metrics is at the project and program level. And essentially there, you use them to track the effectiveness of specific interventions towards meeting specific goals of a project. We might have a project to enhance agricultural production, and we might have certain objectives that are stated, and we have ways of measuring how well we're doing. So we use these. In this case, we use it to improve performance and help in selection of interventions. Okay, so we apply a logic model to help us think about how metrics, what they do, and how they could be thought through. And we begin with inputs into the policy process. Typically, these can be labor, and that often involves expertise such as training, might be funding or adaptation finance. technologies, institutions, there can be others. These then result in what we call outputs. These are essentially goods and services. The adaptations themselves. We might have a new way of saving, of using water more efficiently, something like that. And then there are outcomes. These are short and medium term effects. Then eventually these lead to impacts, which are longer term effects. So this next slide, I'm going to give an example of a logic model to explain these terms. So let's say that the problem we're looking at is frequent flooding affecting vulnerable farms and risky lands. So input might be research into some seeds that are more resilient to wetter conditions, flood resilient. You would test the seeds. You would then develop them, get them ready, and then actually work to disseminate them. Those are the inputs. The outputs are essentially farmers adopting and planting the flood-resistant seed varieties. So they've planted varieties. Then we get to the outcomes. What good do these seeds do? How do they affect crop yields? Do we get higher and more stable yields, particularly after floods, since these are flood-resistant seeds? And then eventually, though, we have to look at the broader impacts. What happens in terms of farm incomes, food security, reduced malnutrition. And these are these impacts that line up with the UAE resilience framework targets that were agreed to at COP28. So we posit three desired attributes for adaptation metrics. First, that they are tied to climate change adaptation. They tell us something about how well are the adaptations working. Second, they're widely applicable. That is, they can be used across countries, particularly with different capacities. The data are there so that they can be broadly used, essentially by all parties to the UNFCCC. Third, they should be scalable. That is, they should work at different geographic scales, down to the local level, national, multinational level. Also over time, that you could see how things change over time. They're comparable, so you can see, okay, this is how, let's say, the case of that flood-resistant variety, this is how it's working in one location, but here's how it's working in another location. So we can make comparisons. And then ideally, they're aggregable. That it means we could combine results, so we can see how are we doing, maybe at a national, multinational, even global scale. Okay, so to align metrics to serve the global goal on adaptation, IPAM recommends that we initially, in the global stocktake process, of course, we just finished the first one, but now we're moving on to the next one, which will be done 2028, that we initially measure adaptation inputs while building capacity to assess outcomes and impacts. In other words, focus on inputs, because things like adaptation plans, that kind of thing, those are easier to assess and measure. But then over time, we need to measure the effect of these inputs and outputs, that is the adaptations themselves, on the outcomes and impacts. Ultimately, how much good are the adaptations doing in reducing vulnerability to climate risks? And so IPAM welcomes COP28's work identifying the GGA targets, and then the Bellum Work Program that's going to begin soon to identify indicators. So the GGA established input and output targets. However, we do note the output targets are qualitative and may need some quantification. We think, though, it is good also to select appropriate indicators to measure progress towards achieving the targets. And in the long run, we need to be able to measure the effect of adaptations on outcomes and impacts. That's not easy to do, but that really is the long run challenge. How do we show how effective specific adaptations are going to be in meeting the global goal on adaptation? So with that, thanks. Turn it back to you, Kareem.
Well, actually, I'll let our chair moderate now.
Okay, well,
right.
What I'd like to do now is have Samraj provide his perspectives on the work of this statement of principles working group, and also consider what this means in terms of what we're doing now to apply it. So over to you, Samraj.
Muted. Yeah, I'm audible. Yeah. Thanks, Carl. And it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's good evening in India right now. And thanks, Joel, for the presentation, which clearly outlines the IPAM statement on its intent and the plan and how to go about the adaptation indicators, especially for the global goals. Now, the IPAM statement on indicators, which was submitted to the COP28, was very well aligns with the final targets for the GGA that was finally agreed upon at the COP28. And it's also, it's in sync with the mandate of the UAE Bell and Work program for developing indicators for those targets. Now, talking about the indicators, it's not that the indicators does not exist, or there are a lot of indicators, but the problem is that the indicators are in fact scattered, and they are not coherent enough to serve as an adaptation indicator. Given this, the IPAM statement on indicators really serves as an approach to assess or evaluate the suitability and the adequacy of the adaptation indicator for the goals. Okay. Now, as Joel mentioned, that now we have the targets, and the targets which are mostly thematic thematic statement sort of target. So given that now it's more imperative to have the outcome and the impact indicators, focus should really be on those rather than the input indicator, which used to be before. I'm not saying that it's not important. It's very important, especially for mobilizing the resources or the financing. But the focus now should shift on more on the outcome and the impact type of indicators. Especially, they are more relevant when it comes to this the kind of a target we have, which is having more than one dimensions, and they would actually cover several dimensions as well. And it's also very helpful for the targets related to the dimensions of the iterative adaptation cycle that is mentioned in the paragraph 10 of the GGA document. Now, one of the key contribution of the document, that the policy document which was submitted at the COP28 by IPAM, was the 3 criteria which was for evaluating the adaptation indicators. And currently, IPAM is having a dedicated working group which is working on developing a proof of the concept by evaluating an indicator using the 3 criteria that was mentioned in this presentation just before. Now, the working group actually is looking at the target related to the agriculture system. And they have, after rounds of discussion, they zeroed in onto a proper pool of indicator on a certain specific indicator like the economic water productivity. And so that we can just present a proof of concept that how these criteria can be used in a way to evaluate this indicator, whether it's a good indicator or a bad indicator, whether it's adequate or not. Okay, so of the 3 criteria, the first criteria, which is very important, which is actually attributing the indicator to the adaptation measures. There are a lot of indicators, but whether they are the right candidate or whether they qualify as an adaptation indicator is the big question. So is it capable, if those indicators are capable of actually measuring the effectiveness of the interventions which are addressing the climate risk, or do they inform the reduction in vulnerability or increase in resilience, or say adaptive capacity? So we just try to analyze the indicator that we have through this criteria. And for example, the water productivity that we chose here, it can, in a way, measure the effectiveness of any water-related interventions, and which is due to the climate-induced water scarcity, as well as it can inform the level of, say, the resilience or the adaptive capacity or the decrease in the vulnerability in terms of the economic benefits, like the availability of food, or maybe the increase in income, etc. Okay. The second criteria, which is again very important, which is the wide applicability. Here, I would like to mention that the indicator needs to be, since adaptation is not just related to the UNFCCC process or GGA, it's also a part of several other goals or the processes like SDGs or the biodiversity goal, or maybe the Sendai framework. So these indicators needs to be applicable to other processes also, because this in a way addresses one of the key concerns of the GGA of avoiding the additional burden on the parties of developing indicators which are specific to the GGA. The second point is that if you look at the target, the indicator should have a broad coverage, because some of the targets that you see here, they contain several dimensions which are related to each other, and at the same time there is also an overlap. Okay, for example, the economic water productivity, if we see, it can be applicable to the target related to agriculture as well as the target related to water, especially the water scarcity dimension, which because agriculture is one of the major consumer of the water. It can also be related to the target related to poverty alleviation, or maybe um, the income or livelihood. So the coverage should be broad. The third aspect or the third criteria for evaluation was, which is very important and the tricky and challenging also, that is the indicator should be scalable, or it should be comparable and aggregable. Scalable is meaning that it's applicable at the very basic level, that's at the farm level or a household level, and to the subnational, national, and even the global level. Now, this is a bit tricky and challenging, because we all know that the adaptation, more often than not, they are mostly context specific and also location specific. So given that, and also there's a great limitation for the data quality, the granular data that is required for them, especially it's a limitation in case of developing countries as well. But this may not be the case always. Now, for example, the economic water productivity that we have selected, it is applicable both at the farm level, the national, the global level. And the reason being that we have the data available, the satellite-based remote sensing data, greater both spatial as well as temporal resolution. So, but this may not be the case always. So this is a bit challenging. The scalability and aggregability is a bit challenging. Now, having said that, these three criteria are good enough, but they are not, I won't say that they are complete enough, because there are a lot of challenges that are a lot of other questions that needs to be answered. They are good enough to serve as a screening criteria to ensure or to confirm that the indicators are actually a right candidate for adaptation indicators. But to confirm the more on the relevance and the adequacy of these indicators, some other question also needs to be answered, such as that whose perspective it's serving, whether the stakeholders' needs and stakeholders' engagements are involved or not, or maybe what the purpose it is serving. Is it competent enough to inform the the national communications, or to inform the funding agencies to mobilize the climate finance and things like that sort. Another important challenge that we face is that sometimes the indicators are affected by certain factors which are exogenous. I mean, they are not affected by the either adaptation intervention or by the climate change. So what should be the case? Should it be a criteria enough to drop the indicator as an adaptation indicator? Or should we keep that indicator, and depending on the level of interference of such factors, should we keep it as a caveat? So there are a lot of questions that still needs to be answered. Okay, but nonetheless, the three criteria and the adaptation statement that IPAM presented does provide a guiding principle for the UAE BELM work program. So I will just stop here. And I think we have now time for some questions.
Sure. If you have any questions of a technical or thematic or motivational nature, please ask of Joel or Samraj. Yeah, I think what you can do is you can put your hand up if you're interested in asking through a reaction. So, Katie Harris. Hi.
Hi, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. My name's Katie. I'm a senior policy fellow based at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and I also direct a partnership called Adaptation Without Borders. And we focus particularly on what we call the transboundary nature of climate risk, not just between neighboring countries, but also how climate change impacts in one place could generate risks to countries on the other side of the world if they disrupt food imports or trading relationships or financial flows and so on. And we're very excited about the global goal on adaptation because a lot of adaptation is planned and implemented at the national or the subnational level. But in light of this sort of transboundary nature of climate risk, I think we would argue that if we're going to assess global progress on adaptation, then we should assess that in ways that are more than the sum of national level adaptation efforts. So we can't just aggregate what is happening in each place. We also need to begin to try and assess our progress in building resilience to risks that are global, regional, or global in nature. And we're not in our partnership metrics or indicator specialists, but it's a real question for me of how might we begin to build indicators that begin to assess our progress to these sorts of risks and that aggregate beyond sort of what is happening at a local or national level. So perhaps this is a question for the later discussion, but I'd be really keen to hear from the experts on the call whether you have considered these more sort of complex risks. And just to throw a shout out to everybody that I'm really interested to explore this as we go forward, particularly in light of the UAE to Belém 2-year work program. And would love to collaborate to learn more from all of you in that regard. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Katie. Joel or Samraj, do you have any views? Response. You have views.
I'll just say it's an excellent question, Katie. And I think that of course gets at this issue of, well, applicability, right? Because you have to make sure, let's think of the Nile River. All right, how is that managed to supply water across all the, I can't remember now how many countries are in the basin, the number escapes me, but you know, and then how do you look at what happens to, well, certainly supply of water in the Nile, quality of water in the Nile, where it's available, who uses it, where it's used, but also recognizing ecological purposes too, not just human uses. And can you do it in a way that you apply metrics, whatever they may be, supply per capita, whatever it may be, economic water productivity might be one, where you could then look at what's happening across different countries and within countries. Yeah, I think that's it's an excellent point. And you know, when you think about these transboundary issues, that's the part of the reason to make sure that really we have this question of comparability, maybe to some extent aggregability and scalability as well. That's clearly an important criterion.
Samraj, do you have any comment or?
And if you consider this transboundary risk, they are really very complex because it's not, there are so many dimensions involved in it. It's not just the climate factors, or there are other political factors and various other factors that are involved. So choosing an indicator for that could be a bit tricky because, you know, that indicator has to be sensitive to all those factors, if not all, the maximum of those factors. You know, so the consideration has to be that what are the factors, I mean, in that region, or the transboundary factors could have affect this indicators. you know, so I think it's a good observation that we can work on. It's a very, very tricky one, that it has to be sensitive to all those, not just the climate factors or the climate risks or the adaptation interventions.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks for the question, Katie. Very good one. Usman, I'd invite you to make some remarks, and I should note for those of you who haven't been involved in the current working group, Usman is on our working group related to this, and so he will have perspectives. In the interest of time, if we could make it a relatively short question and response, though, so we can move on to the second component.
Okay, it's not a question, it's an answer to the previous question. So you have indicator for inputs, but you also have indicator for impact and outcome. And if you're measuring the impact or outcome, then you're capturing whatever is done, even if it's not located. So it means that we need indicator for input at different level. So maybe what is tricky is a link between what this impact and what has been done somewhere else in the world. So that's going to be a little bit tricky.
Thank you, Usman. Okay. Thank you very much, Joel and Samraj, for introducing the statement and how we're applying it. I'd like to move on to a session now that will focus on more the process and the work program that IPAM has forwarded and what we're currently doing about it. So with that, I'm going to give a little talk, if I can get my screen to share. And let's play. So Karim has already given a very similar slide, but I wanted to remind us a little bit about the context for our work. And that is that we're a diverse group of members. We don't have any, we're largely technical people. We're practitioners, we're scientists, we're academics, but we also have people who are involved in finance and policy and negotiations. But we're all interested in the real nitty-gritty of how can we make adaptation metrics serve adaptation and serve vulnerable communities. And we don't really represent any particular agenda, party, industry, or set of stakeholders or initiatives, although we come from a variety of these. We come from agricultural interests, cities groupings, various institutions, but we come together to work on things together that we think will have, global good to them, or also help inform local adaptation efforts. And global metrics are clearly right now high on the agenda, and we can speak specifically to what I'm calling now, because I think this is the formal term for what we're addressing, is the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience, which is the decision that came from COP28. And Iman will have more to say in particular about this. But what we are doing to address this issue is also thinking about it through the consultation of the UAE BLEM work program on indicators. And I've just put down here right now just some language from that particular decision. So prior to the COP, we came up with our proposal for a work program, and I'm going to be speaking to that. What we proposed was, and we proposed this at the COP, was a program of analytical work that would work with other initiatives. It wouldn't be a standalone. We wouldn't be trying to create anything new necessarily, but rather try to complement, support, enhance existing activities to the extent that they are out there related to adaptation relevant global goals. And this is to build upon a lot of the capacities that IPAM has from our policy papers. And I should note that we're going to be presenting other policy papers over the next few months that we've developed just over the period leading up to the COP28. The statement of principles that we're discussing today, And also a lot of IPAM engagements with other groups, including being involved in the Global Stocktake Technical Dialogue and through our involvement and membership and advisory roles in the Race to Resilience, the Adaptation Research Alliance, and other groups like the World Adaptation Science Program of UNEP. And the aim is really to work them to make efforts more systematic and technically robust. As I mentioned, we are not the decision makers. We are people who want to see how we can present options to make better policy and better target setting to result in the outcomes that we want, including enhanced and more informed finance, better understanding over what sort of technology developments or policies or programs will get us more vulnerability reduction and enhanced adaptive capacity. And to do that, what we propose is that we work together at least through the second global stocktake. If you look at the global stocktake, the first one, it's a great accomplishment in many respects, but it's not particularly specific. And so, to go through that and make sure that we have a second global stocktake that's informed by indicators and metrics that will help to spur better action and decision making. And that we do this through partnerships. And these partnerships are critical. And these partnerships need to be technical with groups that have perhaps sectoral focus or understandings of particular contexts, be those national, functional, or also, questions over the social and economic needs of vulnerable communities. They need to be political. Ultimately, the targets that are set and the indicators that inform those targets are really informing policy and decision making. And so engaging with those decision makers is critical, and presenting options that they can use is very important. And then also, financial partnerships are important on two different levels. On one level, it's important that the resources to formulate systematic and technically robust metrics are provided, and so that we have the resources to do the work. But at a broader level and a more a different level, it's necessary that we inform financial decision making and investment. And so the indicators need to be thinking about this, and in the engagement with those who make investment decisions needs to be there so that we can do indicator development that's appropriate. It's also important that there's a consensual governance structure for how we're working within IPAM and the work program that we have, but also with the broader groupings that we may be involved in. So I'm just going to try to make a transition to Iman's intervention by talking about that right now we have a working group in addition to Joel's and Samraj's and Usman's working group that focuses on understanding the approaches to global goals, but another one that's specifically focused on our submission to the UAE BLM work program. And that's, I think, very important for us to think about, because it's a concrete way that we can start to build the work program that we've presented before, with one very critical remit. So with that, I'd just like to pass this over to Iman, who leads that second working group on the process and submission, for her remarks.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Carl, for that smooth introduction. So I'm here to provide an overview of IPAM's thought process regarding the design of the UAE BLM work program. So as you may know, COP28's decision on the Glasgow Sharm el-Sheikh work program on the global goal on adaptation established a GGA framework that is equipped with a bunch of targets to protect food, water, health, nature, livelihoods, infrastructure, cultural heritage, etc. And they also established targets for the iterative adaptation policy cycle from the phase of assessment of risk and vulnerability to the phase of monitoring, evaluation, and learning. And in order to track those targets that are mainly very vague and not really quantitative and measurable, parties have established a new 2-year UAE BELEM work program to develop the indicators to assess the progress of each GGA framework target. So with IPAM, we have established this working group that's drafting and brainstorming the design of this new work program, and the premise of our submission is very clear. We advocate for a highly technical and expert-driven process for the UAE BELEM work program that focuses on a robust technical review and co-development of indicators. And so far, we flagged some recommendations on the organizational work and also on the overarching technical work approach. So on the structure and on the content, basically on the substance. When it comes to the organizational work, we focused on the modalities for stakeholder engagement, the procedural considerations for the structure of the work program, and also some tentative timelines. So to start with the modalities for stakeholder engagement, we wanted this work program to really emphasize a diverse expert inclusion. And in that sense, we're framing in our submission the workshops as multi-stakeholder dialogues that involve adaptation implementers, planners, monitoring and evaluation, learning experts, sectoral experts, nexus experts, and vulnerable communities representatives. We also recommend setting up a specific and distinct calls for inputs to engage research institutes, planners, practitioners, and their specific technical inputs, because usually the UNFCCC's processes, they just call for submissions, and it's usually not specific. It's just very broad calls for submissions to include the most observers, organizations, parties as possible. I think if for this very highly technical work program, we think it might be more pertinent if we had distinct calls for submissions, ones for parties, some ones for institutes, other ones for adaptation policy experts and practitioners, etc. We also thought that maybe this work program could establish some working groups to work on the different thematic and dimensional indicators that were established in paragraph 9 and 10. And finally, on the modalities for stakeholder engagement, we were thinking that the work program could leverage the regional climate weeks for comprehensive perspectives, but that depends on whether these regional climate weeks still take place this year, because the Secretariat of the UNFCCC is still not sure because of budgetary reasons. So when it comes to then the procedural considerations for the structure of the work program, we recommend that the work program's activities accommodate all time zones, it should provide virtual options and ensure timely reporting. In that line, we also call for enhanced information dissemination and quick publication of workshop reports. The process needs to provide months of notice for inclusive and transparent participation, and that's one of the lessons learned from it's one of the failures of the GLASS work program that preceded. And always in line with our initial premise, we think that this process should not be organized as a negotiation workshop with parties' statements. Instead, this work program should prioritize activities such as breakout sessions with guided questions and rapporteurs. And then when it comes to the timelines, although this work program is advertised as a 2-year work program, the real work is only going to begin in June at the subsidiary bodies meeting. So that leaves us with roughly a year and a half of work at best. So in that sense, we think it could take the form of 2 to 4 workshops per year. And it should also include a transparent but offline work stream for product development. So we will have we're kind of thinking of it as we would have, similarly to the glasswork program, we would have workshops, 2 to 4 workshops per year. And then between each workshop, there should be this offline like stream of work stream to develop and build on what is being discussed during the workshops, so that it's a quicker process basically. And we consider that this work program could also be envisaged, just like the global stocktake, into 3 phases. So one that is technical, and then a political one, so that we can, and then of course one in the middle that considers the technical outputs to then transitional to the political phase. And finally, on the overarching technical work approach, on the substance, we recommend that the work program ensures coherence between reporting demands, and it should avoid duplication of work by leveraging existing indicators wherever it's possible. So that entails identifying existing data sets and indicators, addressing gaps, and then exploring new additional indicators. It also entails differentiating between readily reportable readily reportable indicators, and then longer term capacity building indicators. The work program needs to promote open databases and also balance out that data privacy with transparency. And all in all, in this last section of our submission, we want to leverage the discoveries and recommendations from the other case study working group that Samraj addressed earlier. And of course, all these elements are not finalities. They're still being discussed as we are awaiting to learn more about the party's politics before finalizing our official written input. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. I think that was an excellent overview of how things stand right now with our thinking on what we feel this BILIM work program should be about and how it should be run. We're certainly interested in questions and comments from anyone related to this. I'm going to start with questions that might relate to the work program, anything specific there, and then we'll open it for any broader questions. And I also should note that I've noticed 2 excellent questions in the chat that I hope we can address. But first, does anyone have any questions over this work program, both the IPAM proposal for what we intend to do within IPAM and with others, or the specific submission that IPAM is developing right now? Any questions related to that? We'll give it another few seconds. And then, okay, I see.
Sorry. Oh, should I put my hand up?
Do you have a question?
I did, yeah. Is it
Excellent. Pass it up. Go for it.
Sorry. So hi, Sean. I work actually with Mato Alasaba, who is, I'm sure, someone that is known to many of the IPAM people, of course. I was just curious about the work package. How much, or is there a part of the work package also that's devoted to developing, I mean, not just the kind of technical capacity behind the specific indicators, but also the different kinds of approaches that you may use to develop and actually measure those? Because I mean, as much as I can understand the need for, you know, the ability to aggregate and so on, I mean, it's, as adaptation is something that is, you know, very locally experienced, as you all know, like how much, yeah, space for diversity is in terms of how those indicators are developed and measured.
Thank you. And are you referring to both the sort of broader IPAM proposal for doing something on this, or more specifically related to the UAE BILIM work program?
I guess specifically the things that you presented today, yeah.
Okay. Well, we actually, well, in a way, one could say we presented both, but one is much more high level and theoretical, and the other is very specific. Having said that, why don't we start with the specifics? And I don't know if anyone has any comments from either working group related to this.
I would just want to say that when it comes to the UAE Belém work program, there are no specific details right now. Nothing is really set in stone. If you look at the UAE consensus or the GGA decision, everything is a bit up in the air. As I said, the real work is going to start in June. Like, we have to wait for the subsidiary bodies meeting to have a bit more guidance and clarity on this work program, because at this point, we just know that they want this work program to develop indicators to track already kind of broad targets that were established last year. And the point of our submission with IPAM, and I'm sure other institutions and parties' submissions, is to inform the design of this work program, how we are imagining it, how we want it to act, and what type of inputs and outputs should come out of it. So yeah, I hope that addresses your question.
Yeah. And Joel, please.
Yeah, just to add, and this is to pick up on a point that Aman made in her presentation about, this is question of I think what you're getting at, Sean, is the feasibility of these indicators and how much they can be applied. And that can be an argument. It may not be the only consideration, but an argument for relying on existing indicators or building on them as much as possible, as opposed to trying to develop new ones, which then would require a whole effort to get them, to build up the infrastructure to get them measured and reported. But again, just a consideration, I think, as indicators are being assessed and hopefully selected at some point.
Yeah, great, thanks. Could I add something, maybe just because I think we'll be in touch soon through Marta. Actually, I don't know if she mentioned, but we're running a workshop next month about this exact topic. I don't know if it would be interesting for some of the other attendees if I post the registration in the chat, or if it's inappropriate, I can just leave it. That's okay. Okay, yeah, it's just running a workshop about this exact question of what are the different approaches to developing indicators, and where are we going with all of this basically in the future. So it could be interesting for some people here, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Please do post that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. So, Samrash, I don't know if you have any comments on this topic. Otherwise, there were a couple of interesting questions in the chat. And so I'm going to just read Alex's, Alex de Cherbinen. I hope I pronounce it correctly. I've heard that lament that there is no global adaptation metric or indicator that is comparable to mitigation metrics. Yeah, tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, right? Adaptation metrics seem to be heading down the road of the SDGs. Variety of different metrics depending on the sector. Are complicated to aggregate, yes. Or summarize. Is there any hope for a summary metric to tell if countries or localities are getting closer to some goal of resilience? Is ND GAIN, which is the Notre Dame Global Adaptation Index, I believe is what that stands for. It's been around for some time, and I think it's been used by a lot of different groups. But is that appropriate for this? Now, Joel and I, we've had discussions over broader metrics, so you might have a view on that I'd love to hear, but perhaps others on the panel would like to weigh in as well.
Kareem has his hand up. Do you want to?
Kareem, do you have anything quick? Or...
Yeah, very quick.
Yeah.
I mean, this question is good. It's the idea behind the creation of IPAM in the first place, since the big part of the climate finance is going always to mitigation, with the excuse that mitigation is easy to measure, whereas adaptation is not. And I just want to say that the only common metrics or indicator that was used by multi development banks was the number of beneficiaries, which doesn't mean much.
Yeah, and just to add in, right, I think there are some common number of beneficiaries. I think a number of I think Adaptation Fund and some of the others are also using hectares of land protected. But I guess both of those, right, they give you a sense of breadth of coverage. They don't show you the depth of what's happening. I mean, one universal indicator that's very controversial is monetary. You know, you put it in terms of dollars or euros or whatever. And of course, that's controversial because of market and non-market values, different valuations in different economic situations. So it's not. The other thing is an index. You know, the ND gain is an index, and that's promising in a way because you can combine different indicators and metrics. Where the difficulty is how do you combine them and how transparent is it? Because it's you know, and how sensitive are the results to different weighting schemes. So all those are just important considerations.
I see Alex is here to speak to his own question. If you want to elaborate on anything, that'd be very interesting.
Well, I have two thoughts. First, I mean, the presentation was good. I teach on composite indicators. I've been involved with the Yale Columbia Environmental Performance Index for many years. So this is sort of I'm coming from that ethos. I think the SDGs, as exciting as they are, kind of fail the test. There is an SDG index. It's, you know, highly complicated, right? But you know, it's a movement in the right direction. You've sort of adopted a log frame approach to, or I guess theory of change approach to measuring, you know, project level interventions, which is great, but to scale that is very challenging. Here's the proposal. I think that, you know, GAIN, I don't know what kind of working group or expert advisory group they've had to develop what they've done. It does have some traction. It does get cited. Maybe you guys could develop some kind of partnership where you actually bring a little bit more depth to their expertise. Over.
Thanks. I should also note there are some other initiatives that sort of match up, but the focus has been more sectoral, like the Sciences Po, the IDDRI has its Gap Track initiative, which is looking at expert perspectives on, you know, how do things stand in different places. Well, we're getting close to the hour. There was another question that I thought would have been wonderful to talk the relationship between the GST. But Iman, do you have any comments?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can like a quick answer. So there were no clear interlinkages established during the GGA between the GGA and the GST. All we know is, I mean, the decision of the GGA calls for this year's new collective quantified goal on climate finance process to take into account the GST's outcome on adaptation and the GGA decision. So there is that request that came from the decision to link both the climate finance process this year to the GGA framework and the GST outcome on adaptation. And then I can say that, however, at the subsidiary bodies meeting, the negotiators will be discussing the link of the GST to the GGA in the informal consultations that has been flagged in the decision. And it was also confirmed by the Secretariat when we had that chat with them. So the discussion is going to start at the SBs, but so far they haven't established any real linkages between the GST and the GST section on adaptation and the GGA.
Thank you, Iman. That was a great quick response. And as I look, it is 1 after the hour. We must say goodbye, but I'd like to first of all thank the presenters and the discussants. I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us within IPAM and outside of IPAM. I hope that this is an opportunity to continue this discussion as we work through things. I also want to encourage those of you who aren't a part of IPAM but find these issues interesting and would like to learn more and engage. IPAM's an open place to do that. And if you go to our website, you can see how getting an individual membership, you can apply, it doesn't take much. We'd love to have you join us. So with that, thank you everyone, and please watch out for our next webinar, which should be coming up on other policy-related adaptation metrics issues. So thanks.